Good morning, everybody. I want to thank so many of you who've been here, who got here on time at 8 o'clock this morning. So thank you very much. I hope you've had a breakfast or two breakfasts and that you're ready for a really great morning. I want to welcome you to George Washington University. I'm Amy Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Public Service here at GW. I am delighted to have you here for what I expect will be a very robust conversation on equitable development, both nationally and locally. The development of this conference began with a collaboration between Dominic Molden of 1DC and Greg Squires of the Sociology Department here at GW. They're in the back. That's who I'm pointing to back there. They collaborated on a social policy article that we distributed both in the invitation to this conference and is on the tables today. I got involved in this about a year later when their expanded collaboration moved beyond the article and into a conference. Kalfani Touré, who is here from American University. Kalfani, where are you? Maybe he stepped out. And Jessica Gordon-Nemard from John Jay College have also been working on this from the outset. And Jessica's here in front. So my office here at GW, the Center for Civic Engagement, works to build partnerships between academics, faculty and students, and community groups that are mutually beneficial. We work to build partnerships that can strengthen scholarship and help to improve the quality of life in the community. And we move toward bringing structural improvement in communities. At the same time, when these partnerships include students, they strengthen student learning. They build student academic skills as students learn about and learn from community members. This helps to make our students better academically, civically, and culturally. Our students gain the skills of active democratic citizens in a diverse democracy. I'm really enthusiastic about our conference today because we're bringing together people from diverse backgrounds with powerful expertise born of their own experience as residents, as academics, and as practitioners. The scholars know theory and history and economic patterns of community development. The practitioners, the organizers, and the policy advocates know how to move and shape and negotiate the corporate and political activities. And the residents have the knowledge of what happens in the neighborhood and who and what influences how families and neighbors survive and thrive. I look forward to today as a day in which we can bring our own unique perspectives to the table to share with others, and at the same time, listen strongly, or listen, I've been thinking, listen loudly, to hear the perspectives of others, so that we can learn better from one another how to create safe, affordable, and vibrant communities that allow all of us to thrive. And this is the first annual conference of what we expect will be something that continues for many years to come to explore housing, development, and economic and racial equity. I get the great duty to introduce our next speaker. I'm introducing Dr. Terry Harris Reed. Terry is GW's Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. She plays a leadership role here at GW in fostering a climate that values and leverages the benefits of diversity, facilitates understanding across group boundaries, and contributes to GW's efforts to make the Washington, D.C. region a healthier, more prosperous, and inclusive community. Before coming to GW, Terry worked in various positions in higher education at Oberlin, the University of Chicago, the University of Maryland. She got her bachelor's degree from Calvin College, her master's in education from Harvard, and her PhD in rhetoric and intercultural communication from Howard University. The Center for Civic Engagement, my office, is in Terry's portfolio. That means she's my supervisor. She's also a great champion of community-engaged scholarship, of community partnerships, and doing what's right. I'm deeply grateful for her support and for her guidance. So, Terry Harris Reed.
For those of you who know Amy, you know that I'm not her supervisor. She bosses me around. I'm delighted to welcome you to GW today. I bring my own greetings, and I bring greetings on behalf of President Knapp and Provost Steve Lerman, who is my supervisor. Over the last few years, GW, and I'm going to need these, so forgive me. Over the last few years, GW has spent a considerable amount of time discussing and adopting a set of core values, institutional priorities, and strategic areas of focus that will ensure the founding vision continues to be relevant as GW enters its third century. That vision is to educate the next generation of students who represent diverse interests and perspectives to become well-informed, ethically grounded citizen leaders with the ability to find creative solutions to the world's most pressing problems. Equally important is our commitment to excellence in research that is both basic and applied. In both teaching and research, we want to bring ideas into and move them out of our classrooms, labs, and academic publications, broadening our scholarship and approach to the world, looking outward to the community and the globe to engage new partners in real-world problem solving. Our university, with its deep roots in democracy, can be a focal point for teaching about, discussing, and modeling citizenship and leadership. Creating new models and inquiring about old ones are central to our mission for preparing our students to be engaged citizens and creative leaders. To take this role further, we are developing more courses and other forums that promote critical thinking about how ethical decisions are made, what citizenship means, and how to lead effectively and imaginatively. We also are working to expand our presence in the larger community as a forum for thought and debate about citizenship and leadership. GW is already an academic community where civic engagement is a core value. We envision a future in which our university is widely known as a leader in making the world a better place. To help facilitate this future, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion was created to work across the university to examine and highlight the ways in which we are building an inclusive climate, one that capitalizes on the strengths and opportunities that diverse perspectives offer in the generation and application of new knowledge. We are working to become more inclusive of other cultures, both inside our institution by recruiting diverse students and faculty, as well as outside the institution, working together with a wide array of partners like you to develop new ideas and improve our communities. The units in our office, including the Center for Civic Engagement, play an important role in executing GW's service to our local, national, and global communities. In particular, the center works closely with our students and faculty who have a deep involvement in and commitment to the world beyond this campus, reflecting in part their genuine commitment to service and citizenship. Through our academic and co-curricular programs, we want to reinforce the idea that success is measured not solely in terms of individual or national economic well-being, but also in terms of how each person, how each institution, including GW, community, or country contributes to the greater good of a diverse and global society. This conference is an excellent example of the kind of activity we envision to advance our work. I'm not surprised that my colleague, Greg Squires, who was a founding co-chair of GW's President's Council on Diversity and Inclusion, is one of the organizers of this great meeting. Greg is also in part responsible for my being here. He served on the search committee that identified me, and I think he voted for me to this conference is a partnership between GW and community organizations dedicated to making change and building community capacity. I look forward to participating today, and I'm hopeful that our ongoing collaboration will result in impactful research, will contribute to significant improvement in the community, and build long-term relationships that strengthen all of our work. Thank you, and again, welcome.
Thank you so much, Terry. You can see why I'm happy in my job. I'd now like to switch us over because we're going to show a video. It's an excerpt from a piece by Al Jazeera English called "There Goes the Neighborhood." We picked this piece because we feel that it really illustrates and gives a face and a voice to many of the issues that we're going to be discussing this morning. And as you know, we're all visual and auditory learners as well. So here's the video.
From the streets of America's capital, abolitionists, musicians, Supreme Court justices, and famous politicians have made their mark on the city and on the nation. Washington, D.C. is so imbued with Black identity, locals call their home Chocolate City. But Chocolate City looks much different today than it did a half-century ago.
Dave Chappelle. Boy, D.C. has changed. It's different now. There's a lot of white people walking around, isn't there?
Plenty has a big lead among white voters, and Chairman Gray has a big lead among black voters, and there is a racial subtext to some of the issues in this race.
The folks who actually look like me are moving to other parts of the country. They can no longer afford to live in D.C.
The question has become impossible to ignore, as goes the neighborhood. There goes Black D.C., this is the neighborhood called Anacostia. It's far removed from the Washington, D.C. visited by tourists. Even many district residents say they've never stepped foot east of the river. Anacostia is more than 90% African American, in stark contrast to the rest of the city. It's a place of contradictions. Anacostia is plagued by the highest unemployment in the city and a violent crime rate that makes it fodder for the local nightly news.
Bullets ring out, then a running gun battle.
Fights break out at a Southeast Washington high school, sending 5 students to the hospital.
But it also has charm. A historic Main Street, single-family Victorian homes, and hilltop views of D.C.'s most famous landmarks.
Here we are in what used to be called Rosie's Row. And as you see, these houses have now all been renovated, under one degree or another.
An expert in urban policy, Howard Croft moved to the neighborhood 30 years ago. He anticipated being part of an emerging, vibrant D.C. community, a mix of class and race. That never happened.
The city really cared. It could come over here and buy a property like this and make decent deals. Huh?
I think rivers form a barrier.
When there have been plans in terms of the redevelopment of the city, the focus has been west of the river.
D.C.'s inner city is expanding, and along with it, wealthier whites have been displacing low-income blacks. Since 1970, the city's black population has plummeted by 40%.
Do I think that people wake up in the morning and say, how can they get rid of black people in the city? Some people may wake up in the morning and say that. The areas that people saw as critical to diversify Washington, D.C.'s economy, to make it something other than a sort of government plantation. Those areas have been occupied by black people and by low-income people.
Croft is watching to see if Anacostia is next.
And that, of course, has been a kind of bar, restaurant that's always been on the verge of always opening up, and it never opens up.
He has heard the rumors for years, and he's seen one redevelopment project after another fail to come to fruition. Croft is dubious that meaningful change is on the way.
It's happening. Hard life, look at that. So I never noticed it when I come across the Get the Bus. But it's new, it's interesting. It's, well.
But even he finds it hard to ignore the telltale sign.
A person called me the other day to tell me, run down to 15th Street and Good Hope Road. There's a crew of white people jogging up the street. He said, they're here. I mean, it tells you something about Americans and of race in America. I mean, it's like, whoa, there are white people here. Didn't see that 5 years ago.
I'm renovating houses over here and hoping that a more diverse array of folks comes over here.
David Garber grew up in the D.C. area, but he had never spent any time east of the river. Then, 3 years ago, he discovered Anacostia and decided to move here.
I chose Anacostia originally because it's an up-and-coming neighborhood. It's got a lot kind of going for it right now. The prices are really low. People's reaction when I first moved here was interesting because people thought I was a police officer or just thought I was somebody here trying to make a quick buck. I'm the total minority in the neighborhood right now. I mean, it's not very racially diverse. So when I first bought the house...
With a background in real estate, Garber began renovating and selling abandoned homes, something there's no shortage of in this neighborhood. He started with the biggest eyesore he could find.
Oh, Tisha, I don't even know what to say. It looks so totally different. That's my granddaddy's house.
My roommates called it the rotting cinder block, is what it used to look like. So I wanted to give it a little more dignity. Are you selling all this Redskin stuff?
Garber thinks one of Anacastia's selling points is its tightly knit community. But he also believes the neighborhood needs an infusion of new people with disposable income.
You got like the bargain yard sale over here. I think that some gentrification actually needs to happen in Anacostia so that we have a little bit more economic diversity, but it has negative connotations. I mean, people hear redevelopment or gentrification and they sort of recoil and don't want the neighborhood to change from what they have known it as for the last 30 or 40 years.
I'm not a believer in that the answer is to put up barricades to stop people from the suburbs from moving back into the city. I think the challenge, however, is, how do you build the city, for the people who live in the city?
Croft does think his neighborhood is long overdue for change, but he says his neighbors have seen what change means across the river, and that's not the kind of change they want.
They don't want to be kicked out of the neighborhood. They don't want to be displaced.
So is this a real yard sale?
That may explain the anxiety some of Garber's neighbors are feeling, as he discovered today.
And I just thought I'd, be neighborly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
It's like, he's not for us. He just wants to sell the house. He don't like us.
She was just talking to some of the guys, and they said that I'm not on their side and that I don't like black people or something. And I mean, that's so ludicrous, but I don't really give it much credence. Like, I know what my intentions are.
There's evidence everywhere you go in D.C. that D.C. is becoming richer and whiter. You can go in any number of neighborhoods and you see specialized stores that have come up. You see bike paths on the road that didn't exist previously.
Sabia Prince is writing a book about African Americans and their responses to the current demographic changes taking place in D.C.
The fact that we have this first African American president right here in this city where this gentrification and tensions are proliferating in the way that they are, it is very ironic that it's happening now. That's all you can say about it.
Washington, D.C. has been an important urban center for African Americans for centuries, but it's always been a segregated city.
Washington, D.C. reached its largest population in 1950. A little over 800,000 people resided here. Shortly thereafter, the population began to decrease very rapidly, particularly between the decades of 1950 and 1970. At the same time, we were also seeing an increase in the African American population.
Urban whites began to flee the cities to chase the suburban dream, then a national trend. By 1970, the black population peaked at 71%, and then it started a precipitous decline. Croft says at the beginning, this was because many blacks with the financial means were fleeing the city too.
I think they moved to the suburbs for similar reasons, for why white middle class people moved to the suburbs, which is, they could get more for their housing dollar.
The crack epidemic shattered D.C. neighborhoods, but in the last 10 years, a revitalized economy has changed the landscape of the city. Cafes and boutiques now occupy once abandoned commercial districts. Luxury condominiums are popping up across the city. D.C. is luring a young, white, affluent crowd.
Some people have dubbed that white urban discovery, where people are experiencing shorter commutes, closer proximity to their workplace and to their friends and people that they work with, where they're really building a sense of community that's centered in D.C.
For the first time in over a half century, D.C. is experiencing a population increase. More than 40,000 whites have moved into the district this decade.
Now the numbers are increasing. Now we're talking about a wave more than just a trickle.
But the black population has continued to drop. During the same period, 27,000 blacks left the city. Prince thinks this current black migration out of the district, unlike the earlier years, is not voluntary.
Although there are a lot of people that are talking about a renaissance in Washington and how things are improving and they're getting better, we definitely know that inequalities have increased. That affects gentrification because gentrification is about having access to investment money for improving your home or for starting your own business.
African Americans have borne the brunt of the country's economic slowdown. Today, the unemployment rate for blacks in D.C. is more than twice as high as it is for whites. And the average yearly family income for whites is $92,000 compared to just $35,000 for blacks in the district.
We're going to see some ramifications of that. What is that going to be? It's going to be perhaps higher poverty, but if that also goes along with evictions, housing policy is definitely playing a role in the potential displacement of African Americans in a number of different ways.
That's the reason for the protest here today. The Shaw neighborhood was once the heart of Black D.C. In 1970, over 90% of the population here was black. Today, Shaw is a much different place.
Personally, I find that I can come and work in neighborhoods like Shaw every day, but I can't afford to live in neighborhoods like Shaw. And I grew up in Shaw. Gentrification has made it so that the folks who actually look like me are moving to other parts of the country. They can no longer afford to live in D.C.
Robinson's hunt for affordable housing took her across the river.
I live east of the river, and I actually view that as the final frontier because I see gentrification taking hold over there as well. And I see white people walking their dogs out there. I know the neighborhood is about to change. I try not to feel resentful, but in reality I do. This is my city, this is my home, and I refuse to move.
It's a good video. Gives us a lot to think about and a lot to process as we go through. Jessica, I think that's right. We can clap for the video. Now we will transition to some more discussion and talking. It's my honor to introduce to you Jessica Gordon-Nemard. She's Associate Professor of Community Justice and Social Economic Development in the Department of Africana Studies at John Jay College of the City University of New York in New York City. She's also president of One DC, and she spearheaded One DC's move toward shared leadership and workplace democracy. Dr. Gordon-Nemard is a political economist specializing in community economic development, wealth inequality, black political economy, popular economic literacy, and community justice. She is an accomplished woman, and I am delighted that she will be here to talk with us briefly. Jessica, I'm happy to have you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see a good crowd here. Welcome. Actually, all I'm doing right now is introducing our keynote. Angela Glover Blackwell, who's actually somebody I've known my whole life, and somebody I've been trying to follow my whole life, which is really hard if you know her or know what she's accomplished. She's got energy, passion, commitment, intelligence, wisdom, and she's an activist. And in a minute, I'll go over some of her bio. But I'll just tell you, when I first saw her this morning, she was asking me how I was, and I said, "Oh, I'm fine, but I need to slow down." And she said, "Oh, you're talking to the wrong person." And I said, "Yeah, I have the wrong role models." But Angela has always been a role model for me, and you'll see why. She's the founder and executive director of PolicyLink. And actually, she'll probably tell you more about PolicyLink, so I won't do it. She was previously a senior vice president at Rockefeller Foundation, where she oversaw the foundation's domestic and cultural departments. She's a lawyer by training. She gained national recognition by founding Oakland's Urban Strategies Council, where she pioneered new approaches to neighborhood revitalization. She also is a frequent commentator for New York Times, Huffington Post, Washington Post, Salon, CNN. She appears regularly on shows like Public Radio's Marketplace, Tavis Smiley Show, Nightline, PBS's Now, and she's also been a guest on the PBS series Moyers and Company and PBS NewsHour. So you will hear for yourself how inspiring she is and the kind of work she does. So I bring you Angela Glover Blackwell.
Well, good morning. It's my pleasure and joy to be here. Jessica didn't tell you how she happens to know me all my life. She's my first cousin. My mom, her dad, brother, and sister. And it is such a joy to have people like Jessica in the family because it really allows for a complete integration of what it is you believe in and what it is you do with the people that you love, and you get together and you can just switch back and forth between family talk and national talk and world talk and justice. So I'm delighted to be here. That is really a powerful film. It's a powerful film. I wanted to start off by talking about demographics. And usually when I give this demographic part of my talk, people are in sync with what I'm saying because what I want to talk about is the nation's shifting demographics and how we're becoming a nation in which the majority will be people of color very soon, and almost a majority of children are we're almost there. This particular video forces that question in an unusual way though, because obviously here in Washington, D.C., that's not the way it's feeling, and makes what I want to say all the more important because we have to figure out a way to change the national narrative. I'm going to talk about equitable development, but before I talk about equitable development, I want to talk about equity, and I want to put it in context. PolicyLink is a national research and action institute advancing a new generation of policies that achieve economic and social equity. And our commitment is to do that from the wisdom, voice, and experience of people who are working for change in their local communities. Because we believe that local leaders are national leaders. They are solving the nation's problems every day. And we need to lift up their wisdom, what they're learning, and use that to drive a national policy agenda that creates an all-in nation. Where we are, though, is that we're at a point where the pressure and the urgency of equity is greater than it's ever been. When we started PolicyLink in 1999, 15 years ago, we're just now celebrating our 15th anniversary. When we started PolicyLink 15 years ago and we lifted up equity as our mission, which let me define it for you the way we define it, just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. When I say equity, that's what I'm talking about. When we lifted that up 15 years ago, I think what we were trying to do was to bring a sharpness to the conversation around equality and equal opportunity, and to move the conversation beyond a focus on equal inputs in the education context. When you think about equality, you really think about children having access to schools where the curriculum is the same, where teacher quality is the same, where the time spent in school. But when you really think about what we need, all children to reach their full potential, we may need very unequal inputs. We might need more time in school in some neighborhoods. We might need to spend a lot more on children to surround them with all the supports that are not able, their parents are unable to provide for them. And so we wanted to focus the conversation on what it is we want to achieve, and then back into what we have to do in order to get there. That was really a conversation about a moral imperative that this country had always had and had not lived up to. When it got to be close to 2010, we were thinking, you know, this conversation about equity may be about to take on an even greater urgency as we anticipated that we were becoming a nation in which the majority would be people of color much faster than people were thinking. People were talking about 2050 before the 2010 census. Well, it's not 2050 anymore, it's 2040, 2043. Already, beginning in 2012, the majority of babies born in this country are of color. Right now, 46.5% of all children in the United States are of color. In California, 73% of all children in California are of color. By the end of this decade, and we're just going through this decade so fast I can't believe it, by the end of this decade, the majority of all children will be children of color. By 2030, the majority of the young workforce will be of color. When you think about the condition that this country is in, not able to pull out of the Great Recession. You know, people try to talk about indicators that it's changed. It's not. We all know it's not. We know unemployment is high. We know inequality is growing. We know the middle class is stalled. We know economic and social mobility is non-existent as a concept anymore. We know that 45% of all black children born into the middle class will end up in the lowest 20 percentile of the economy, will end up poor. As we think about where we are as an economy, where we haven't figured out how to have a real economy because we had one that was all smoke and mirrors right before the crash, where it was all being fueled by the housing bubble, consumption based totally on credit, deregulation of a financial industry with which a few walked away with everything and most people were left with nothing. We realized that the nation is in a crisis at the very time that America can see its future. It's a 5-year-old Latina. It's a 7-year-old black boy. It's a 12-year-old Asian young person. And what happens to those groups and children will determine the fate of the nation. The equity agenda, just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential, has moved from being a moral imperative to being a national and an economic imperative. Equity is the superior growth model. And so as we think about how to be able to lift up the equity agenda, we have to recognize that we're at a moment in which it has more currency than it ever has, but we have to help people see it. Now, when we started PolicyLink 15 years ago, and we said we were about equity, we looked around and we said, well, what's the biggest thing that's standing in the way of equity? And we concluded it was our development pattern. It was our development pattern because place had replaced race in terms of what was holding people back and keeping them from reaching their full potential. That everybody knows the story of race in America, and we all know what happened as a result of the civil rights movement, and we were able to knock down the legal discrimination that was happening, but discrimination continued. It continued in many ways. It continued on every level, but the most profound way in which it continued was in housing and housing discrimination. People were not able, people who were black were not able to take advantage of the increases in housing values that people who were white were taking advantage of, that people who were black really were concentrated in certain communities in any metropolitan area, and those communities were suffering from disinvestment, and we saw a steady disinvestment in education, a steady disinvestment in terms of infrastructure investment, a steady disinvestment in terms of businesses being in communities. And so our housing patterns, concentrating people of color in areas suffering disinvestment, people who were white moving to suburbs, better schools, better economic opportunities, more access to everything that was being doled out, that what we ended up with was becoming a nation in which where you lived was a proxy for opportunity. Where you live literally determined whether or not you got access to a good school, whether or not you lived near economic opportunities in terms of live near jobs, whether you live near a transportation system designed to connect you to opportunity throughout the region. It even determined if you were lucky enough to own a home, whether or not that home had any value you could extract in an emergency or to pursue an opportunity. Where you live determines how long you live. You tell me your zip code, and I can tell you your expiration date. That should not be. It determines how well you live while you live. I had the opportunity to be on the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation commission to build a healthier America. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is a leading foundation when it comes to health, particularly health care. This commission, however, was not about health care. It was not about access to health care. It was about how to build a healthier America. And the first things that they talked about were economic status and education. And what they discovered in the background for this commission is that zip code was the most reliable determinant of health, well-being, and longevity. And they put out a series of postcards in communities all across the country showing an area and highlighting those places where lifespan was lowest. And inevitably, it turned out to be the poor, the Black, the Latino parts of town. It even determines how long you live. So as we thought about this, we said what we really need to do is we need to focus on our development pattern, and we need to change the way we think about development, not thinking about it in isolation, but thinking of development as being an equity opportunity. And we started talking about equitable development. When we first started using that phrase, we were really responding, this was in the 1999, we were really at the height of gentrification across the country, in San Francisco, in Washington, D.C., in Boston, in Chicago. And the thing that we put up on our website was beyond gentrification, the Equitable Development Toolkit. And so we saw equitable development as a direct way to fight gentrification. Shortly after that, the housing bubble happened, gentrification slowed down, and it didn't seem as urgent as it was when we started off, and we just began to talk about equitable development in many ways. But one of the things that we tried to hold on to that was one of the big aha moments for us when we were doing the Beyond Gentrification Toolkit was that when you're doing development work, you have to expect success. Assume success. Imagine success. What happens too often when we go in communities that have been suffering from neglect is that we don't even have a vision of what success would look like. We're just working on it. We're just working on it. We're just doing stuff. But if you really believe in what you're doing, what will happen is the community, the neighborhood you're working in will become an attractive place. It will be a place where the people who are there are happy to live. It'll be a place where the housing stock is good, where the schools work, where there are parks, where the streets are safe, where transportation connects to opportunity throughout. Who wouldn't want to live in a place like that, particularly if it's cheaper than every place else in the region? If we expect success, we'd never end up with gentrification, because what we would do is we would secure affordability from day one. If you expect success, you're going to secure affordability from day one because you know you are about to create a fabulous place where everybody is going to want to live. And if it's cheaper than any place else, who wouldn't want to live there? We don't expect success. That is the first thing that we need to do. I think we still have opportunities to apply that simple lesson across the country because there are still a lot of places that are very cheap. One of the things we always talk about gentrification in Harlem. And while there certainly has been a lot of gentrification in Harlem, there are a lot of very low-income people who live in Harlem and will be able to live in Harlem for a long time because they secured affordability. There was a time when they were selling places in Harlem for $1, and people like those working what was then Reedland Center for Children and Families and now the Harlem Children's Zone helped people in that community get those homes. And while lots of things are going on around them, there are a lot of people in Harlem who are going to be able to be there for a long time who are very low income. So we need to really expect success and make plans for how to do that. The other things, though, about equitable development is for us, equitable development was a way to achieve regional equity. Make sure that the whole region becomes a place that people have access to and that it is fair and accessible. Regional equity includes 3 things. You have to make sure that people can live in communities of opportunity. At one point in America, that meant having access to suburban communities, but we've given people access to suburban communities, but we haven't helped them have access to opportunity, which is why we now have a situation in which there are more poor people living in the suburbs than living in the cities. The notion was that people would live in communities of opportunity and take advantage of opportunity, not that they would live in communities of opportunity and not have any. But we do need to make sure that when we have communities rich with opportunity, that people can live there. Inclusionary zoning is a fabulous way to do that, and really making sure that inclusionary zoning goes very deep into people who are low income and not just 50% of the median income. That often doesn't really create the opportunity that you need. But we also need to make sure that people can connect to opportunity throughout the region. Transportation becomes so important. Wherever you live, you ought to be able to connect to opportunity, but we should also be thinking about when there are jobs, how to create linkage programs with community colleges and other places so that we really are making sure the community colleges are helping people to access the jobs. In California, we have PG&E, that's our energy company, Pacific Gas and Electricity. They recognize, looking at the shifting demographics, that their workforce is retiring, that they were going to have thousands of jobs that were going to open up. And your PG&E company is not one of those that can just up and move very easily. So they recognized that they needed to have a local workforce. And so they developed a program in the local community colleges, serving mostly people who are Latino and African American, to be able to have a tailored training program for those jobs at PG&E, which were good middle skills jobs, often paying $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. The rewards of that program have been tremendous. That's an example of regional equity, making sure that you're connecting people to jobs throughout the region. We also need to make sure, though, that every community is a community of opportunity. That every community is a community of opportunity. That's really when you've achieved regional equity. And that gets right back to the issues that we were talking about in the film, that as communities improve, we have to have strategies that allow people to stay there. And we have to make sure that we're constantly working on communities improving. The tension that we sometimes feel and the dichotomy that we sometimes set up in terms of revitalization and saying no to it because you don't want to gentrify, and people in communities wanting their communities to improve. Now, how can we pull these two things together? The way to pull them together is to do what I was talking about in the beginning. We want every community to be a community of opportunity, and we want people to be able to stay in communities as they improve. We have to anticipate that we're going to be successful and secure affordability. And there are a number of ways to secure affordability. It's not like we don't know how to do it. Community land trust, a fabulous way to do it. There are examples of it all around. We need to have the commitment, local, state, and national, to why this is important, which gets back to the thing I started talking about in the beginning. As we become a nation in which the majority are people of color, this notion of making sure that we always lead with equity becomes absolutely imperative. How do you do that? Equitable development is absolutely the way. Integrating people and place strategies, so we never fall into a situation of working on the place strategy, an elegant transportation system that doesn't connect people to jobs. That's an example of working on the place strategy and not thinking about people. We need to make sure that we are constantly asking, how do we develop in ways that reduce social and economic disparities? That the community benefits work is just wonderful work in terms of communities seeing public investments as an opportunity to advance the equity agenda and doing everything they can to hold the decision makers who are deciding what to do with public dollars to hold them accountable for an equitable agenda. We need to ask, whatever we're doing, how do we reduce disparities? In Oakland, California, the Oakland Army base, and any of you who've ever spent any time there recently might know that it just sat vacant for over 25 years. The Army base closed and it sat there, one plan after another, what to do about it. Well, at last, they have found something to do with the Oakland Army base. They've turned it into a transportation and logistics center. They're making huge investments, an $800 million redevelopment project. But the community-based organizations pulling together as an advocacy arm, working directly with the city, they were able to come up with a wonderful community benefits agreement that included local hire, disadvantaged hire, living wage jobs, limitations on temporary workers, community oversight and enforcement, really making opportunities available for local entrepreneurs by breaking up some of the contracts. And what they ended up with was a decision that 50% of all the work hours would go to local residents, that 25% of all apprenticeship work hours would go to people who had severe barriers, people who were being formerly incarcerated, veterans, long-term unemployed. that for every 20,000 hours of the project, there would be a sponsorship of a resident and a new apprenticeship of a high-quality apprenticeship program. That kind of stuff really makes a difference. And part of the exciting thing about the Oakland story is it wasn't just advocacy from the outside. People working within city, very much they worked in partnership. That's the kind of thing we have to do. Dayton, Ohio has a very interesting program called Welcome Dayton, where Dayton recognized that population was shrinking, businesses were moving out. They wondered what was going to bring Dayton back. As they looked around, they found that the one thing that was happening is they were having an increase in immigrants moving into the Dayton area. They decided that what they would do is really focus on how to be a welcoming place for immigrants, that they looked at the employment opportunities, they looked at the entrepreneurial opportunities, they looked at what was happening with the police, and they came up with a series of protocols that have made them a place very welcoming. For example, the police chief decided they would stop checking immigration status for victims of crime, for witnesses, for minor traffic offenses, those kinds of things, and they've turned Dayton into a place where they're welcoming people who will be able to do a lot going forward. Thinking about how in the development process you reduce the social and economic disparities. The other thing that's a principle of equitable development is to always look for the triple bottom line, constantly looking for the triple bottom line. How do we really make sure that we're paying attention to the environment, we're paying attention to the economy, and we're paying attention to equity? You have to do them constantly, and the payoff is tremendous. And you can't have equitable development without authentic civic engagement. Community voice, community wisdom, community agency are all crucial for an equitable development process. And there have been some very good things that have happened. One of them is the Sustainable Communities Initiative out of HUD. When PolicyLink heard that they were thinking about doing a Sustainable Communities Initiative, we thought this was an example to infuse a lot of what we had been learning about equitable development into that process. And we realized that they needed to make sure that equity was right there with the economy and the environment in terms of how people who are doing housing and transportation and economic development plan together in regions. The first thing we did is we loaned one of our staff to HUD, a loaned executive, for the sole purpose of being able to develop the equity part of that. The next thing that we did was we really pushed to make sure that in the guidelines that equity was lifted up. But we didn't stop there. We had a series of webinars where we invited equity advocates from around the country to learn about the opportunity, but also learn about the tools and strategies they needed to bring with them to the table in their local communities. I was recently in Minneapolis, where they used $750,000 of their Sustainable Communities Initiative to engage community, money that went right out to communities to be able to be full participants. That is an example of how to be able to take seriously the community engagement. It doesn't just mean that you have one meeting and you bring some donuts and you say, tell me what you think, or one meeting and you bring some donuts and say, what do you think about this? It means engaging people at every stage along the way. So we know how to do equitable development, but we have not been able to do a couple of things that are essential to make it work. One is that we have not taken it seriously as advocates and community developers in terms of anticipating success and locking everything into our community revitalization work to make sure that we're securing affordability and we're securing housing. We have not been able to take the equity agenda and tie it in a routine way to the national agenda. Too many of us who are equity advocates, social justice advocates, continue to see ourselves as standing on the outside, hoping to force or gain some attention for an agenda that we think is a moral agenda. It is a moral agenda, but we should not think of ourselves as outsiders. We are the American people. We in our constituency, if we don't get it right, if we don't win, America doesn't win. This isn't a special interest agenda. This is the agenda for the United States of America. We need to begin to feel that, say that, and force others to see that getting the equity agenda right is the only way for the nation to thrive. We need to make it very clear that over the course of the past 50 years, we have gained a wealth of knowledge about what to do. We know what to do. The PolicyLink tagline is lifting up what works, because we believe that you can show us any problem and we can show you a community that has figured out how to address that problem. But we too often allow those innovations to just die on the vine when a foundation moves on, when an elected official gets unelected, when a charismatic leader takes another job. We have not figured out how to systematically weave together all that we have learned in our years of struggle into an agenda for equity and inclusion that we're all pushing no matter what we're doing. We have to be out of our silos. That just because you're doing housing doesn't mean you don't lift up the people who are doing access to healthy foods. Because if you're doing housing, low-income housing, you're trying to make sure that people can live near opportunity. And one of the opportunities they need to live near is access to fresh fruits and vegetables. If you're doing economic development and you are involved with a grocery store operation, you need to think of this as an economic development opportunity for the individuals in the community. It's a chance to get jobs. It is a chance to get jobs. If you're doing something in the job arena, you can't think of this as being unrelated to wealth building. You can't think of it as being unrelated to the housing opportunities. So to the degree that we're serious about understanding the enormity of the opportunity, the wealth of knowledge that we all have, the fact that equity has to be a screen across everything we do, if we get that right, we get it right for America. I think that we really had, that boils down to three things. That in order to be able to really take advantage of the fact that equity is the superior growth model for the nation, everything has to think about how do we grow good jobs. If it's about the economy, it's got to be about jobs, living wage campaigns, minimum wage campaigns, making sure that tipped workers have access to a floor that is a decent one, making sure that we really are placing a priority on voice in the workplace, that we're really pulling unions into the work that we're doing, that we're all in the same struggle. We have to really be thinking about growing good jobs. At the same time, we have to really make sure that we're building the capabilities. By 2020, 47% of all jobs in this country will require at least an associate's degree. Only 28% of Black and of Latinos and African Americans have an associate's degree. Only 14% of recent immigrant Latinos have it. Clearly, we need to invest in building capabilities, but we need to make sure that those capabilities connect to the economy. Another thing that we know is that Black, Latino, and Asians open businesses at 3 times the rate of white people. But they're not tomorrow's businesses, they're often yesterday's businesses. There isn't any access to capital. There's not anybody hooking people into the resources and the capabilities people need for those to really grow. And those are the businesses that are most likely to hire other people of color. We need to build capabilities. The last thing we need to do is we need to remove barriers and create opportunity. We have to remove barriers like the barrier of being formerly incarcerated. You know, the incarceration scandal, I'd say, is the biggest scandal in this country since slavery. And we need to do something about it. We need to be outraged about it. And we need to make sure that people who are coming out of that system can vote, can get jobs, can live in community, can live in public housing. We have to remove the barrier that has been so unjustly placed on people. At the same time we're removing barriers, we need to create communities of opportunity. And creating a community of opportunity is doing the kind of thing that they did in Harlem, around the Harlem Children's Zone, the kind of things I've seen them do in Minneapolis with the North Side Achievement Zone, the sorts of things we're seeing happen in San Diego and Los Angeles. All over this country, we have examples of how to build communities of opportunity. That has to be part of what we're doing. So my message is that the shifting demographics make the equity agenda more important than ever because the country is in need of a new narrative. And it needs to be a new narrative that includes everybody. It needs to be about an all-in nation. And you have a bookmark on your place, a book that PolicyLink did with the Center for American Progress that lays out the policy agenda for an all-in nation based on the changing demographics. It's free. You can download it. You should do that. The next message is where you live in America has become a proxy for opportunity. Place is everything, and that we need to make sure that we're thinking about regional equity as one of the imperatives for how we advance equity. In doing that, we have a robust frame, which is called equitable development, for trying to get there. And equitable development is a way to pull together everything we've learned from every sector, whether it's transportation or housing or environmental justice or education or health or building healthy communities or access to food. We know what we need to know. We need to pull it together and make sure we're doing it all every time an opportunity comes up. And the last thing is just never forget that this is about the economy. That sometimes we get so caught up in the services that we're delivering that we forget that if we're not making changes in an economy, if we're not opening up the economy, if the economy is not inclusive, if we're not thinking about the jobs that people get, and if they're not jobs that people can really support their families with dignity, they're not any jobs that we should be proud of. That once we know we got to have a wash about the economy over everything we do, it forces us to equity is the superior growth model. Thank you very much. I was asked if I would take a couple of questions, and if you have a couple, I'm happy to do so. Yeah, the question, did you all hear it, is the struggle between the new generation of leadership and those who were here during civil rights. I do sometimes feel it. I must say I'm very excited about the new generation of leadership. They have some strategies and qualities that are just amazing. In Oakland, we have something called Oakland Rising, and it's the new generation of leadership really stepping forward to say that we want to have more influence over politics and policy in the city of Oakland. It's multiracial. It's moving between culture and policy in ways that are really quite seamless. Very savvy about the use of technology. Comfortable with the economy in ways that are new to some activists who grew up in a time in which the economy was taboo, could never be a friend, could never be a tool for change. And so I find a lot of connection with the new generation of leadership that comes on like that. I like the multiracial dimension to it because I think that's the new reality. That while I never am one that says that we can't organize within racial and ethnic groups, I think that builds many things that are positive. I think cross-racial organizing is absolutely essential for being able to see the true power of the new coalitions that can be built and to see the opportunities to reinforce. So I like that multi-racial, multi-dimensional aspect to it. I think that we haven't done enough to emphasize the power of art and culture in social change and building cohesion and revitalizing communities and being able to have a more inclusive sense of what's going on there. So I like that too. I definitely am envious of their comfort with technology. I try. I'll leave it at that. But, I'm not as good as I want to be, but I think it is part of the future. I think that, though, that what people who were in the civil rights era bring, which is something that one could be learned from, is a staying power. I often tell the people that I work with that we've had great success at PolicyLink around creating greater access to fresh fruits and vegetables by having full-service grocery stores in underserved communities. If you go on our website, you'll see some pretty amazing work that we've been able to do to move that forward as a policy agenda. The Healthy Food Financing Initiative that just recently got incorporated into the Farm Bill came out of the advocacy of PolicyLink working with the Food Trust and the Reinvestment Fund. But I tell the story to the young people who work at PolicyLink that before they were born, and it really was before they were born, because it was 1979 that I started working on that as a public interest lawyer, and kept coming back to it over and over in different ways. That kind of staying power is something that I think civil rights leaders really did bring, because they were in a struggle the struggle had been in place for so long, and they knew they were in it for the long haul, that kind of long haulness. I think that understanding the dimensions of race in America, better understood sometimes by people who have come out of the civil rights movement than people who have come up in an era where you have a black person as president of the United States. I think we have a little bit of generational tension around that. understanding the need for intergenerational organizations, because I'm reading Stokely, A Life. I don't know if anybody's picked that up yet. It just came out. I'm just about a third through it, and it's delicious, I will say. It's just so good reading about Stokely Carmichael and John Lewis and SNCC and all that went on and being reminded of that. But one of the things that comes out is how intergenerational it was, and how important that intergenerational organizing was. And I think people in the civil rights movement experienced that. And I'll just say one thing that might be a little controversial. They're not, I often find that younger people don't like it when I say this. But when I was growing up, young people got to the power table because they earned their way there. They earn their way there. I see a lot of young people now saying, we just need to have more young people here. And go out and get young people and bring them in. And the young people who come in feel that they need to be at the decision-making table around it. Well, I'm for having more young people in everything I do, but I think that people need to have a sense that you have to earn your way to the decision-making table. You have to earn your way to leadership, that you don't just get there because of your age. And I think that was very clear during the civil rights movement. You had young people. John Lewis was at every decision-making table, but nobody questioned why John Lewis was there. He earned his way into that decision-making. So there's a lot to learn back and forth. That was a long answer to what you asked, but I thought it's a complicated issue. So I guess now we have time for one more question, and that's it. That, you know, we just really need to form a partnership to do that. That's a partnership question, because as I watch this film about Anacostia, that is a perfect place to do it. A perfect place to do it. And what does it take? It takes political leadership that really believes in equitable development, really believes in equitable development, not just as something that that political leader talks about when they're talking to the people in Anacostia, not just talking points in this meeting, but not in that. Somebody who honestly believes that the way forward is one where equity is front and center and equitable development is a driver. First, you get that political leadership. Then you get community organizations willing to work together and to pursue some goals and principles. Too often, our organizations don't work together. We have them, but they're worried about credit. They're worried about emphasis. To be able to pull together the community organizations and agree, these three things we're going to accomplish. One of them has to be to make sure that the residents can stay and enjoy the transformation. So you've got to have a plan for doing that, and everybody has to be focused on it. The other is that we're not going to do any development here that doesn't result in jobs. And those jobs have got to go to the people who are in the community. The best way to build a mixed income community from a poor community is to increase the incomes of the people who live there. That's how you build a mixed income community. And that needs to be the strategy that you agree on. So you've got to get the community to agree on some strategies. You have to not reinvent the wheel. We have the Equitable Development Toolkit at PolicyLink. It needs updating. It's not the be-all, end-all. But I can tell you, if you put our work together with that of 5 other national organizations, you've got the be-all, end-all. Gather what is already in place and bring in national experts to help know what goes wrong, what's essential. So really reach out, let what you're doing become a place where people can realize their dreams. Because, you know, national organizations, they all have dreams, but since they don't work on the ground, it's hard for them to realize it. They want to work in places where they can realize their dreams. Pull in the national experts. Pull in the federal government. You're in the seat of the federal government, and this is a federal government that values place-based initiatives. Promise neighborhoods, choice neighborhoods, the Burn Initiative, the Sustainable Communities Initiative, Promise Zones, My Brother's Keeper. All of this has a place-based focus. The federal government ought to be working with you in complete partnership to make sure that all of those things are realized there. Those are some of the things, but real partnership is the way to do it. Thank you all.